How about some additional, may I suggest, exhilarating ramifications of the possibility that emotions might be individual, separate, living entities? Consider one of the great, just almost overcome by longevity, notions, complaints, observation man has had regarding his emotions goes something like this: that he forever, right up until today, complains that the emotions that he sends out get mistakenly interpreted by the intended receivers. Now, everyone knows that. Literature is full of it. It is the basis of some extremely long pieces of literature and fiction and history having to do with all sorts of ostensibly metaphorical, take that, ideas, windmills, whales, adulterous women, attorneys with scruples, humble neurosurgeons, non-horny priest. Well, you get the picture. But they could very properly be analyzed, deconstructed in such a way that you could analyze them as being a complaint, an observation, a tale told based upon emotions being misunderstood. But even now, even right now, is going on, it may have gone on with some of you at an ordinary level just before you came here, that you turn to someone, a family friend, even a stranger in a market, and apparently you attempt to send some emotion, even just a vague friendly one, to a passing stranger or to a close sexual mate, that you try and send a specific one about love, displeasure, whatever. Look at the problem that everyone has, and they analyze it in such a way as being, my God, what in the world is going on? All I was trying to convey was the fact that, look, I don't like that. And it got into all sorts of Byzantine, Rococo interpretations on the other side. You mean you really don't like it? Did you say you didn't like it? I said I didn't like it! Oh, wait a minute. Are you talking about, or you attempt to convey just a feeling of goodwill to somebody? And the person says, what you looking at? It seems to be something totally amiss, and normally if people had to make any verbal notation of it, I would suggest, this is not the point, but I would suggest that they would lay it primarily at the doorstep of the intended receiver. A sophisticated person, now and then, here and there, might theoretically take part of the responsibility and say, well, perhaps under the pressure of the moment that I did not convey it intently enough, but my God, they should have called on to the general purpose of what I had in mind. Enough of the setup. Now for the punchline. If emotions were separate, living entities with their own genetic agenda, transmitting precisely what they intended, with man simply acting as a medium, then there may be no mistakes going on whatsoever. No. You got to face it. I set it up. I even set it up in such a way that it is verbally sequential. It is logical. It is 2 and 2, albeit in a field of mathematics not normally pursued. But if indeed emotions themselves had their own life, not recognized as such, and man, in the case, let us isolate it just a bit here so we can talk about it, that in the matter of human emotions, secondary emotions, the emotions that are unique to man as opposed to a mink or a beaver on this planet, what if those emotions have their own genetic agenda, their own life, and then, which if we can go that far, you've got to accept this, there's a possibility that what they're doing, if they're off on their own and you've never recognized it, so don't immediately start trying to argue with this, where the hell were you when you figure this out by yourself? So don't say, wait a minute, just because they exist by themselves doesn't mean that they know what they're doing. Since when did you become an expert? See? Well, you got to do that to you, not me do it to you. You got to take yourself and slap yourself and say, hey, don't give me that stuff. Because your ordinary intellect will run right in like the epitome. I mean, look in the dictionary. If they had terms, if you had a term dictionary as opposed to insurance, and you look down to the term that said Johnny come lately, you look under there and it's always going to have either a good photograph or a darn good sketch of your brain. Yours. At any rate, if this could be true, then you have no conception, you have no idea, no notion as to what might be the ability of emotions to preserve themselves, look after themselves. So you've got to accept that there is a distinct possibility that what they're doing, far beyond your knowledge, you never knew about, you never considered it, that what they're doing is exactly what they intend to be doing. And if that be true, then the idea of a mistaken, wrong interpretations of this continuing problem of conveying emotions one person to another could be the medium complaining when it's got no idea what the message is. It has less than a full notion. It would be not unlike, may I suggest, that you had radio signals going out carrying the specific program that they had in mind, regardless and in spite of, and perhaps the fact being that the transmitting facilities and the ultimate receiver may think that the airways are filled with spurious, confused signals. That is quite possible if you're going to reasonably carry this as far as I am unreasonably presenting it. That it could be that if we were talking about this three-sided performance, that we have a sender, it could be a person, or I was trying to draw you another analogy, a radio transmitting tower, the facilities, a radio station. It's there. Then you've got someone somewhere, a receiver, sitting there with your little Marantz or your Sony or your Silvertone if you had good taste. You've got those two, and then you've got the signals themselves going through the air. If the signals representing emotions have their own programmatic intent, just assume it for a second, it's possible. It could be going on and being transmitted, that one-third part may be going on precisely, exactly, nothing even close to mistaken interpretations involved. And that could be going on while the transmitter and the receiver both, not necessarily simultaneously and exactly the same, but they both could find the signal being confused, mixed up, picket fencing, cross-talking, bouncing off buildings, spurious ghost signals coming in. I'm not sure what was the intention. The transmitting tower could be saying, "Can't you hear?" And the receiver going, "Well, I thought I did, but did you say so-and-so? Are you listening?" And it seems to be a great amount of confusion going on. And in the middle of that, relatively speaking in a 3D world, could be the radio signals themselves doing quite nicely, thank you. Quite nicely. No mistaken signals going on. Them performing. Them playing out their own program exactly as it should be. Since we haven't done it tonight, we'll do it now. Everyone pull your robes down. Get out your hymnals and everyone hum, "God, great God Almighty." Wouldn't that explain a lot? Wouldn't it? Or, if you'd like to push it just a little bit further, it's a variation of this, distinct enough that I'm going to bring it up. I've mentioned in other contexts before, but they've had a lot of floods around Texas and Arkansas, so maybe we should recover it. That is, the intellect of man has forever mused, excused, and otherwise whined over the difficulty of one adequately describing how one feels. May I suggest the classical literature, and even the ones not classical enough to make Cliff's notes, throughout history, if they were not based upon apparent misunderstanding emotionally between peoples, groups, then anything left over was on the basis of somebody, somewhere, ripping their shirt, tearing their hair, moaning, whining, trying to explain why it is that they have something that they feel that's of some importance, at least to them, of course, and they cannot seem to describe it. But, seeing as how they have another 472 pages left there in the book, they'll give it a shot. Besides that example, all of you know how many times throughout your life have you had your own brain tell you, or you've heard someone else's brain tell you, I just can't tell you exactly how I feel. And it, without any question, at that level, appears to be a weighty, if not sweaty, important matter indeed. That I want to convey to you what it is I feel, whether it be of a romantic, whether it be of a friendly, whether it be of an intellectual nature, or whether it be of an emotional nature. That I so badly want to express how I feel. And it's not just, as my first example, limited to conversations twixt people. Literature is full of it. Of people sitting down trying to write poetry, trying to write the great novel, trying to write their own philosophical magnus opus. And they're just sure I've got something to say. There's so many fabulous, and I believe unique ways that I have observed life and thought about things. I'm just sure others would profit, and perhaps I could turn a buck or two. I'll just put all this down. All right, here I go. I got a typewriter paid for, got plenty of paper. But it never goes right. You even ask people, how does this read? What do you think of this? Why do you do that? One reason is this, I suggest. Well, I'm not actually getting down what it is that I really feel about this. Well, why not? I mean, is the KBG or is the Secret Service hiding in your cellar, and every time you get close to putting down what you really feel, that the emotions police jump out and say, oh no, and you have to say, all right, I won't. Well, let's don't be silly. Are you ashamed? You could say, the real big-time writers with nerves of steel say, no, I'm not ashamed, especially fiction writers. I'll write anything since my mother died. That's the big-time authors for you. But they will say, well, I feel free. This day and time, circa 1990, there is what amounts to no constructive censorship in this part of the world. You can write, you can use any words, you can use any descriptions, you can be just as graphic in about all areas as you want to be, and yet people still say, I can't really express what it is I feel. All righty. What if it went more like this? That the reason that one cannot tell how one feels is that one does not feel. The emotions feel. And you are the conduit. You are not much more than a passive medium. Oh, I know. All right, sing it again. My sweet Mohammed's aunt, that would explain even more, wouldn't it? Not more, everything, at least in this one regard. The reason, just think about it. Remember, this is just entertainment, folks. Out there on tape, I keep forgetting. It's just, I don't know, stuff that... that the whole thing that I cannot, and you know I'm not making fun of this, that it seems to be a special burden, a problem, a brick wall in people. In fact, the more they're sophisticated, the more they're up to date, the more they're intellectual, of trying to express the way they feel, either to other people, to themselves, or to the world institutionally through writing, or through music, through drama. But it's a continuing. The Shakespeares, everyone, it does not mean that those that you might think have been successful did not have it. Contraire, if you'd like a sidestep right quick, they felt it even more so. If you took whoever you thought was the greatest author, let's say in the English language, of Shakespeare, as you start reading excerpts and suddenly strikes you that 9% of the stuff you thought was great in the world, he wrote. And the other 10%, Pope did. And you think, well, now there's a guy, he could express things, Jesus. But if we had him here, he would be telling you the same thing. He'd go, well, I appreciate the compliments, and especially the few shekels that come in from my work. But, boy, that's nothing. That's not what I really feel. I never have gotten it down right. I'll tell you the truth. I'm proud of some of it, I guess. Especially, I might add parenthetically, for ordinary people. Especially since it had some success. But just between you and I, he might say. I don't know why he would not say you and me. But just between you and I, he might say, I have never completely, totally expressed what I felt. How many plays did the man write? How many sonnets? How long did he live? He didn't die an early death. What held him back? Here's the answer. Here is a possible answer. Nothing held him back. It was not much more if you want another one. How about this? Speaker wires in your home stereo. It's them trying to analyze, trying to describe the electrical pulses running through them from the tuner to the speakers, the electrical pulses that will ultimately turn into the audio signal. And it's them trying to describe. And if they could talk, I suggest to you, they could never adequately describe. If they were decent, reasonable, truthful, talking speaker wires. They would say, well, there's something going on. I mean, I get electrical charges. There's things that come through me that I just feel like I want to say. And they almost, if you want me to carry this metaphor a bit further, they almost believe that they can speak because they are part of a chain that ultimately ends up in an audio signal. That is, let's assume that your tuner, your CD player's over here, and you got 6 or 8 feet of speaker wire, and then you got your speaker. And if the wires we've got these 3 components, 3 parts of it. If the speaker wires did have their own life, their own entity, and some intelligence, and we're talking along such lines as we are, I suggest that these electrical impulses, which is what is going through the speaker wire, before it's turned into the audio reproduced into the making the sounds that you hear come out of the speaker as music or whatever, is they would say, damn, I am not just an inert piece of lamp cord or speaker wire laying here. Things go through me. I get chills. I feel things that, I don't know, it's like cannons going off. 1812 overture. or at times I feel almost transcendental. Brandenburg concertos or Goldberg variations. Some Bach. Or at times I feel like, ooh, the basic Mother Earth spirit is in me. JB. In this scenario, the speaker wires would not be without any provocation for them to believe that in some way they are a part of, and they're laying there in the room, and there's these beautiful sounds, inspiring, soothing. They could be instructional records playing, but there are these sounds coming out. There are these sounds coming out, and the speaker wires would know correctly that I'm some part of this. But for them to try and analyze these electrical pulses going through the wires, I suggest if they were indeed as truthful and as intelligent as you or Shakespeare, they would be left historically with this. I don't know, I just can't fully explain what it is I feel. Assuming that you are more intelligent than Ripcord in this scene, then you could say, well, wait a minute, I understand why. I don't feel superior. It's just it's a different level. You're not dumb. You're doing the best you can. There, nice lamp cord, speaker wire. But you would, if it was talking, you would understand, well, I know why you're saying that it cannot truly express what it feels. I know. I see what you mean. Now, do you see what I mean about you? Just theoretical entertainment. How about another side step that we didn't hit when I brought this up several nights ago? In the triaxial dance I was suggesting of a sender, and in particular arbitrary, artificial, isolated example that I, in medias res, jump into life and set up a situation. That one person, one human, first player, is sending an emotion. The second player, another person, is apparently receiving it. And then the third possibility of the emotions themselves being part of the dance. One place I did not try and direct your attention was internally. Specifically this. Consider, it may sound strange just for a second, but you'll hear that it does take place, that you engage in a kind of sending of emotions internally, apparently from yourself to yourself. To try and help a little, make the first yourself 2 words, which you can. That you're saying it from yourself to, next time 1 word, yourself. Was I incorrect that everyone found that a little strange at first, but then realized it wasn't? That is, was I in the first part correct and the second part not so correct? Okay, try this. I'll give you a bloody example. How about every idea that you ever had to change? How about all feelings of guilt? That's not yourself sending emotions to yourself. That's not some internal dialogue beyond verbal. Guilt is not verbal. The feeling that I should change is not verbal. People do not decide, I think I'll quit smoking. Why is that? I read a real pithy axiom that, I don't know, it just made me, it said something about, wrap your neighbor as you would yourself. And I understood, hey, I should not get angry. I should not drink. There has to be an emotion behind it. And so apparently at one level, before we go any further, apparently in some way it is you talking to you. You may have said, well, I picked up the information I have about that it's a 99% certainty that if I smoke another 20 years, my lungs will turn into bloody pulps and I'll die a horrible death. I never really thought about that until I read it. So, and I've been thinking about it now for the last 10 or 15 years since I read it, and I reread it. And so I'm beginning to think, maybe I will. Looked at from this view, you do hear what I'm saying, that apparently it becomes, I guess ordinary people would say, it has to become your decision. That is, reading this article there in that magazine, seeing that special on TV, at the time did not seem to do it. You seem to have recorded it, and information you seem to recall periodically. You can go through that old fancy talk all you want to, is periodically, in the course of you continually talking to yourself, that yourself tells yourself, you remember that thing with all those bloody lung things about how you're going to die a horrible death? Apparently it's you telling you. What if you looked at that conversation instead of just you talking to you, which is unusual enough and useful enough, But what if you looked at it as being you talking to you, as you, the part, either part, apparently being one end of life's nervous system, and the other you being another end of life's nervous system, of there being a transmitting facility and a receiving facility, and somewhere in the middle seems to be all this kind of inner chatter that you have that is not just verbal, but that has a passionate basis to it. Every thought, every feeling that you've ever had based upon, I should be doing something differently. I should stop this. I should start something else. Shame on me for this. There I go again. As the receiver, do you not take it personally? Well, hey, you point out the obvious. But what if the message, in the same way, recall, going from transmitting from a radio station to your receiver at home, and apparently you turn on the station, and you know which station you're looking for, that good old easy listening, that good old country and western station, whatever it is, you know where it is, and you apparently turn it on, and apparently you may or may not get a clear signal, you may or may not pick it up, but what if, even whatever you think you picked up is not the full signal, that the full signal, whatever the intention was, could have an absolute separate life of its own? If that be true, do you understand that the feelings that you may have of, I should not be doing this, shame on me, even though it's serving a purpose, obviously, in life, what if it, from another view, had no relationship whatsoever to what the emotions life was, what its agenda was? It could have some, it could not. Well, try and hold it down. Well, I wanted to tell you so bad, and I don't know, I just couldn't seem to describe it. Either that, or life just does not see any particular purpose in having anybody hear that and think, Put more crudely, maybe some of you thought you were beginning to hear it and thought, hell, I don't want to hear that. Not right now, I'll put that off. Okay. Next paragraph. I was wondering whether we had anything further to say to something I brought up last time we were taping regarding the existence of primary and secondary emotions, which, for you people on tape, there are no such things. I made those up. There are descriptions, and they're just as good as anybody else's description. They are just as real as guilt, fear, happiness, jealousy, success. But I do want you to understand there's no such thing as primary or secondary emotions. There are manifestations that happen that would be, for a more operational, more useful purpose, could be temporarily described as secondary and primary emotions. And if there were anything else to say besides whatever you may or may not have heard last time we were taping, how about 2 or 3 possibilities, and let's see how it goes. For those of you just catching this on tape, primary activities of man, I'm simply been referring to as those things that at a most minimal physical level are required to keep the organism of a man alive. And the secondary would be everything else. The secondary now becoming, at its own level, necessary. Kind of a secondary, primary, secondary, necessary. But to start to limit out at all, we need to talk in more absolutes of there being primary emotions and secondary emotions. And if we were, what could be said? Several things pertinent to what we were already mentioning tonight. One is that anything that would be directly pertinent to the primary needs, the primary sensations, the primary emotions of man is not required to be put at all into words. A corollary of that is at the primary level, there is no such thing as meaningful mistaken interpretation of emotions. Give you an example. Meaningful. You have to understand. There is no meaningful misinterpretation of emotional signals between two horny rams. Now, they may end up in some sort of little headbutting contest. That's the way it normally goes out there in the less civilized world. And the dominant one will run off the other one. But there is no sort of mixed signal going on. One ram, one lion during mating season, two males do not meet, and one male sends out, and there's a female over here laying in the bushes reading Cosmopolitan and waiting. One male does not come walking up from the east and another one from the west, and one male looks at the other one and says, "Hey, I saw her first and you better watch it," and starts walking, and the other one keeps walking and bumps into him and gets his head ripped off. In the second line, if they could talk, going, "Oh, wait a minute, I didn't know you were that serious." That does not happen. They may get into slapping and a hissing contest about who's going to dominate, who's going to get her, but there is no meaningful, mistaken signal sent. And I'm using this as an example of what would be, if they could be isolated in such a way, primary emotions. They do not get mistaken in any meaningful way. And that does, well, surely you catch the point. It simply does not happen. Animals do not get in conflict over sex, over food, over territorial rights on any basis such as one deer goes, "Well, yeah, I smelled, somebody I knew had, wet around this area and marked it off, but I thought it was a dog or something. I didn't know it was another deer." And the other deer go, "What? Are you nuts?" The primary emotions, again taken arbitrarily, artificially, as being separate possibilities, separate actualities. The primary emotions do not even feel the urge to try and explain themselves. Do not even feel the urge. Withal, then you're left with all secondary aspects. Using my descriptions, taking sex as primary and romance as secondary, reflection of that. Taking eating as primary and taking dining as a secondary reflection. Taking shelter, in the full sense of the word, as being primary, and then living facilities, lifestyle as being secondary. All right, taking all of that, then if you can just hear the validity of the fact, if all of this existed, the validity of the fact that primary emotions do not even feel the urge to describe themselves, then, where I was going with all, is then realize it would only follow that secondary emotions then breathe the very air of words. They could not exist without describing themselves. Notwithstanding the fact that they continually say, "Well, I'm trying my best," and one or two things. Either I can't seem to do it, or when I do it at all, I'll be damned if I'm not misunderstood. Now, if you followed that, where does that put the full story of, if we had a little organ background like a radio soap opera, where does that put the story of secondary emotions? Well, it puts them on this basis, for one thing, that they are living on an intellectual and a limbic anthill. They cannot explain themselves satisfactorily, or if that doesn't seem to be the immediate problem, if that they don't seem to be thinking about that it is coming out and they don't stop and think, "Wait a minute, I'm not explaining myself," that they're on a roll going right along, And suddenly, the receiving end of this dance makes some response that makes them aware of the fact that, Jesus, are you listening? That's not even what I was trying to... That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I was feeling. Another person goes, And then, of course, then the other person says, well, wait a minute. When you start talking about such and such, I felt so and so, and you go, what? And they look at you and think, Alfred E. Newman. You go, If the scenario I have been drawing out for you for entertainment purposes were true, then the whole area of secondary emotions, every activity in the city, individual, institutional, all hobbies, all occupations, all romantic interludes, all daydreams, all pursuits of success, all dreams and fears of failure, everything that goes on in the city is based upon a most iffy proposition. An absolute continual inconclusiveness. An absolute inescapable frustration. Either apparently coming from your side, now we're talking about emotions, remember, right now. Either from your side, that is, I just can't explain what it is I feel. I feel it so deeply. I feel it so strongly, and I know how important this is to us. And yet I can't seem to adequately explain it. All right, it's either that, or it seems to be, if not your problem, that is not your fault, not some flaw on the sending end, it's on the receiving end. That is, all right, I seem to be going along, and it doesn't seem to be my immediate problem, and I'm not sending what I intend to, but here I'm right in the middle, that my song is going right along, and suddenly another person says, wait a minute. Now you mean, what you're trying to tell me is that you feel so-and-so, and you think, holy Moses, that's not even close to what I'm talking about. You've been standing there for 5 minutes listening to me pour my heart out, and you thought I was talking about so-and-so? So it's either your fault, your flaw, or somebody else's. What if there is no way out of that? Now are we going to have to sing a third chorus of, phew, that sure would explain it. But notice, here is another splendid area to point out that nothing is wrong. Of course, that sounds like some kind, if you people on tape or at some other time are listening to this 3rd and 4th and 17th handed, that boy, that's some kind of slick, or I've never thought about that as really a critique of the human condition. What if it's not that? What if all that is just right? And if the answer is not in some way, some theoretical answer like, well, everything's supposed to be all fouled up. What if that's not it? What if nothing's fouled up at all but on this basis? That these two partners in the dance believe that they're in some sort of, you know what an Apache dance is? Kind of a struggle. It's a makeshift of a guy the historical way. Up until now was the guy kind of pushing the girl around. I think it was originally supposed to be a pimp and his prostitute. All right, his hoe, pushing her around and throwing her around, slapping her around. And so it would seem to be some sort of conflict. But if you understand that that is the purpose of the dance, it's a staged scenario, then you go, well, all right, I may or may not particularly like it, but if that's what it is, okay. But instead of trying to find an excuse for a particular dance, a particular circumstance that you might try and theoretically say, well, maybe people do misunderstand each other, and that's just the way life is. What if it's even beyond that? But now you've got to go around the corner outside the 3D world. That not only is this maybe all right, but if you can go this far, any question of this being all right or not all right is just, you'd never think to do it. It doesn't even come into question if the dance itself, or in this case the emotions themselves, not the transmitter, not the sender or the receiver in any way are flawed. That the receiver is not sending out what it meant to, the receiver is not getting what it intended to get. No. That may or may not appear to be true to those two, but what if there is a third player, the signal itself, the emotions, and that these two may or may not have any idea. Let's assume that what they think is going on may have no pertinent connection, which is possible, to the actual intent, the genetic agenda of the signal. The signal could be doing swimmingly well, precisely getting done what it needed to get done, while the other two players, the other two dancers, the other two participants in sending this emotional signal may both feel as though the signals are spurious, they're confused, they're mixed. That could all be taking place at one time, and do you see that it's not a theoretical excuse moi for humans not understanding each other, but there may be something entirely beyond the concept of ordinary intelligence going on. That is, emotions, the signal, the dance itself, having a life of its own, and being a full third partner in what it may be doing. What may be its genetic agenda may have no connection. Just, you got to take this until you see it. May have no connection to what the other two participants, that is you and another person, or you and another institution, or you and yourself, may believe is going on, should be going on. No. Another little, let me point out one thing while I'm here. Side trip. Another difference between what would be primary and secondary emotions is that primary emotions, if they existed by themselves and we could talk about them and identify them in isolation, primary emotions would never feel human outrage over such things. If we could split up humans, and we were talking about Homo sapiens somewhere, like in the past, but better yet, right now, but still, their past genetics being in charge. In other words, if we had, you understand how this goes, don't you? No, you don't. All right. If we had an ape man right now, a Neanderthal man, oh, all right, even an insurance salesman, right here, and every other thing being equal, and here they were, then we could talk about it this way. And they would be experiencing primary emotions. Primary emotions do not experience any sort of ordinary human outrage, such as if they were in a place and they were in the midst of an extreme scarcity of food, almost about to starve to death. There would not be the kind of human outrage there would be over such other important matters as this. That you put a quarter in the paper box and the damn thing won't open. That is outrage. Secondary emotions. Primary emotions could be faced with starvation and not feel that outrage. But, wait a minute, but, I wanted to point out, primary emotions could also coldly and silently kill for food. But not feeling outrage if there were none, or if they were in the middle of an earthquake or a tidal wave. But if a Homo sapien, if a person that we could talk about in stretch reality like I'm doing, that we had someone living, operating strictly on the basis of primary emotion, they could be in a place starving to death and there would be no sense of outrage if we could be somewhere observing them, and had the scientific hard-heartedness not to go out and feed them, but we were just observing, they would starve to death, and you would never see any sign of outrage. It's true with animals. But you would see no sense of outrage. You would not have primary man, a man with only primary emotions, out there in the desert cursing the gods. And he would not in any way show any kind of outrage. He would just lay there and slowly die. He'd take a nap and wake up when he could, and he'd just die. And yet, if he was kind of crawling around, he'd get up every now and then, and he did come around the corner, around the sand dune, and there was food, and there was another human eating that food, coldly, quietly, silently, no outrage. Primary emotions would go over and just kill him on the spot and take the food. Two things. Now, I brought it up for a reason. And it's certainly, of course, not to point out that man is bloodthirsty. You didn't need me to point that out. That's not it. This manifests itself minute by minute in the city life. But it goes under all sorts of misnomers. It is going on continually in the world of secondary activities. You figure it out. One more thing before I change the paragraph about the two, is that what is ordinarily referred to as morality. Morality is all verbal based. All morality. And thus it is secondary, and thus it is different from, if there was such a thing, it would be different from any fingers, real goodness, whatever that might be. But if there is such a thing as real goodness, in the full sense, you don't have to take it in a parochial, spiritual, religious sense, but real goodness, which I'd suggest to you has to do with growth and expansion of life. But if there was such a thing as real goodness, then verbal-based morality would be a secondary emotion and would not be the same thing, to say the least. You're trying to compare apples and fish. That wouldn't incline you to think, that even explains something about history. That even explains something about how my nervous system thinks it remembers history. Even when it apparently reads it in a book, and my system goes, uh-huh, or, oh. Every time you go, oh. It is a sense of moral outrage, whether you get up and shake your fist at the gods for allowing something horrible to have taken place. But it is a kind of outrage. But all outrage is secondary. Now it will kill each other. It can result in killing. People kill each other over discussions, apparently, of the merits of different basketball teams. They can kill each other over a matter. I like my little made-up scene. Over some stranger at another table's criticism of your choice of a dining experience. That you are still so crude and gauche as to be eating still that Nebraska nouveau cuisine. And it can result in death. For as long as we're here, I might hint to you why I stopped and took off on that side thing about primary emotions do not feel outrage and yet can kill. Quite coldly, quite silently. But, you are keeping all this in your head at one time, right? But, back to where I was, all morality, under whatever name, whatever religion, whatever social conditions, under whatever tribe, under whatever nationality, under whatever culture, all morality is verbal based. You cannot have morality without words. You cannot have morality unless it can be described. You cannot have morality unless you can say, hey, don't do that, it's immoral. Without that, you got no morality. But with that, you have got to realize, on the not untoward basis I have made up for you, you've got to realize that that would be a secondary emotion. And thus there's never a conclusion to it, and you've got to realize that if there is such a thing as real goodness somewhere, the reason that men cannot experience it, I'm just taking what they say, I'm not saying they can't, but men say they can't. They say, well, I get close, I try, and then it's like, oh, I don't know, I just can't do it. Or I feel like I'm real close, and if I just had another piece of information, I could do it. Or I'm almost feeling good, I could be real goodness, and I'm about to experience goodness and even share it, and I'll be goddamned if the person I'm trying to be goodness with, share my goodness, goes, are you trying to put a make on me? I'm trying to share goodness. And you think I'm trying to put a move on you. My God, what's going on? I've already told you possibly what's going on. Well. Now, before the tape runs out, I wanted to pick up one more thing from the last time we were taping. If you recall, I was referring to smile and eat it, having to do with, I said it was a nice little, normally unknown, even though we've talked about it here before under other guises, other nom de plumes, nom de guerre, maiden names, married names, Christian names, atheist names, and etc. But the idea that I was giving you, to be able to take all forms of criticism, censure, hostility, questionable looks, is to take them with no opposition and just to smile and eat them. After what we did talk about last time, I just wanted to be extremely clear if I could. It's so hard to say exactly what you... to try and get you to look at it very simply. That if you can do that, if you can find out what you're doing, it's this taking place. The dynamics is this, that your apparent opposition, your critic, your censor, no matter what they think they're sending you, if you smile and eat it, no matter what they think, what you're doing is getting free energy. That's it. And that, friends and neighbors, as all of you should know, is a Reva Aris. You have a quite exotic creature if you can find free energy. But when somebody else sends you any form of hostility, criticism, emotions that do not serve to please the duck, and you offer no opposition, you don't think about it, you don't analyze it, you don't excuse it, it's what I'm trying to tell you is smile and eat it. It's like you open your mouth and whatever it is, whatever they thought they were sending, what you got is a free meal. That is smile and eat it. And it will make you smile. You can't help it. Because everyone, from Mayor Daley on down, knows there's no such thing as a free lunch. I know, but he still knows it. A man of his political wherewithal, just because he's dead. After all, he's the man who used to point out at every election, vote early and vote often. At any rate, everyone has heard all the way from Homer on down people saying there's no such thing as a free lunch, which is true enough in the city. I mean, it's true enough to sound like the basis of a morality play and to keep the children and the freeloaders off the streets, right of your way. But in a way, if you can get outside the limits of the 3D dining experience, then all forms of criticism, all forms of hostility that people engage in is in fact a squandering. It is a throwing away of perfectly good energy if you know how to smile and eat it. It is being used by life. It is being used as it need be, that it's requiring everybody's energy. It's all being transferred back and forth. It is the Federal Reserve System having to do with emotions and criticism are open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There is no stop in the transfer of funds. It's going on, it's just back and forth, and it's taking all of the change, all the money, all the energy that everyone has to keep things unchanged. But there are free meals around. All you've got to do is take. It's flowing past you. It's going through your hands and your pockets, through your account all the time. Every little form of criticism, any snide look, snide remark, is just open your mouth and take it. Somebody just threw away perfectly good energy. They just took money and just threw it. But you can't do anything with it if you go, hey, who you throwing that at? You know, if you do that, in any way, if you offer any opposition to them hurling free money at you, then it's not free and it's not money. No, it's free money, but you can't do anything with it. It hits you and it bounces to somebody else. But to smile and eat it is regardless of why they threw it, they're squandering energy and money. And to smile and eat it is all you do is to get a free meal. You get free energy. I feel 2 or 3 minutes also compelled, if not inclined, to once again point out, to note, that the possibility of developing any other neural building site in you may be adversely affected if you allow your old intellectual areas to continue to run slack and lax, I'm telling you there's a distinct possibility this can have an adverse effect on any possibility. Or if you'd like it cruder, I would strongly suggest that you take care of all the bloody city details. Because no matter how it appears to you, no matter how much stress, no matter how hard you think you try to think, looked at from another new area within your own brain, the ordinary operations of everyone's intellect, it's like playing a slack string Hawaiian guitar. No offense to any Hawaiians. Your mind is hanging slack. Things are always running kind of limp. And you always feel. Everyone has to continually find some way to explain, well, I don't know, I forgot to do that. Or, well, I meant to think about that. Or I told myself I was never going to feel that way or talk that. All of that. It's city slush. But I was just felt inclined to humbly suggest again that such little things may have a quite specific possibility of having a negative effect on any new intellectual activity. It's just a thought.